Welcome, Daniel and Abda. Thank you for joining me. This webinar is about the ins and outs of looking for a data solution and then getting hold of it. So there's a couple of elements. First of all is you've worked your way through your data project. You've realized there's a need for a governance tool, an MDM tool, quality tool, whatever it might be. And there's a whole world of tools out there, more established big brands, smaller niche products. And you can go to the trade shows, you can read Gartner, and you can find a whole pile of them and not really know where to start. So I guess the first question is going to be about how on earth do I pick out what's right for me or right for my organization? And then you get to a place and say, well, either I've got a procurement team or I haven't. If I've got one, then they're going to have a whole load of questions and challenges, and maybe they'll stop me doing what I want to achieve. And if I haven't got one, then I'm kind of on my own against a whole load of professional account managers who will, could potentially fleece me. And they're both hard. So we're going to sort of have a chat through each of those things. Daniel will help us and sort of give some guidance on what we are. And so let's dive straight in. Let's talk about this idea. I want to buy a master data management tool. I felt there's a need to get one, and I'm scratching my head where to start.
Before I start on that, thank you, Charles, for inviting me for today. You made an interesting comment that we hear in procurement a lot around procurement are going to stop me getting what I want.
Yes.
And it's the big fear I think that procurement have, that procurement are just seen as the police of a process and they're actually blockers as opposed to enablers. And I'm not going to get into the whole debate around the value that procurement can have, because that's not the point of this conversation. But it's interesting how that was one of the things that just leapt into your mind as you were speaking. And clearly it's something that we as a procurement profession really need to work on, so that isn't the default position, that procurement are blockers. So going to your point around, for me, if I put it to you being my stakeholder, let's say I'm in the procurement team for your organization and you've identified a need, in this case data management, and you've come to procurement, you've had a procurement manager or a category manager assigned to this project. So I'll play the role of that category manager that's had it assigned. The first thing I'm probably going to ask you is probably a bit of a background. What is that product? Because you at the end of the day are the subject matter expert. Procurement's job is to try and make sure that you get the product in the appropriate way for the organization in terms of following the process, whether that is ensuring an invoice is sent out correctly, making sure payments are correct, making sure that the risk around who you're contracting with is managed, but are not necessarily the expert in the product itself. A lot of the time, depending on, or some of the time at least, depending on the organization, there will be experts within procurement who will specialize in certain areas. But I think a fair amount of the time, especially in smaller organizations, they won't. They'd be relying on you, the expert. And I would be relying on you, either you'd work for the business, or I'd be bringing in someone like yourself, Charles, to the business that is an expert in that area to say, well, what is it exactly that you want?
Right. And and so if you look at the needs, some firms will bring in a consultant like me, and I'll go, right, I can see you want master data management solution. We'll run with that example all the way through. And I'll go, look, I can give a long list of 8 to 10 tools that you might want. We might look at Forrester, might look at Gartner, might look at sort of what I know. You may have your own favorite. The guy might say, I read Forbes last week and it said this tool is awesome. I want that on the list. So we'll work our way through. I would then typically do some sort of desk-based research. Maybe have a brief chat with someone at a high level just to work out, if our budget's 100,000 and the product starts at 500,000, then we just put a cross-rip straight away. It's not even on the radar.
Right.
So I can get it down to kind of 2 or 3 that are sensible-ish.
Right, but hold on a minute. So because you see, you're what I would call solutionizing.
Right.
Whereas I'm still, you follow a procurement process. It's normally X amount of steps, depending on who you are, depending on the consultancy. They'll have 6 steps, 7 steps, 5 steps, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But the key process, step 1, is not necessarily what is the solution I'm after, as in who is the supplier. It's what is the problem that I'm trying to solve. Because the problem that you're trying to solve is then hopefully going to guide you towards how much is that going to cost, the license, the time, the effort, the change, and also who are the players out there. So really it's a case of me asking the question of what is the solution that you're trying to achieve, or the problem you're trying to solve, as opposed to what do you think the answer is in terms of product or vendor for that product. So I'd be looking to to ask, what is this problem you're trying to solve? Make sure that the right people are involved. So building up a stakeholder list. You've got the subject matter expert, but are there other people that need to be involved? Does the legal team need to be involved? Does the finance team need to be involved? Does IT need to be involved? If you're going to be putting in a major application that's going to need a lot of integration, do they need to come on the journey with and advise about the product, because they'll input into the specification. So before I as a procurement person would want to go anywhere near the market, I think there's clarity around who needs to be involved, who's going to effectively specify this product, and what is it that they're trying to achieve through the specification. That would be my first stage. That'll also then help me understand what strategy I want to put forward, possibly who's going to work on it. Is it going to be me? Should it be someone else working on it? Should it be someone more junior, more senior? And how much effort are we going to put into this? Because it could be that we say, actually, you don't need procurement. Crack on with it yourself. It doesn't need procurement involvement.
So interesting to me straight away. So I'd kind of jumped several steps from where the project would have been. Say, right, when you look at your data program and you look at the work stream, say what do we want to achieve? So, we'll start building it manually. We'll start looking at what the challenges are. We'll see, you do quick Excel solution, do we need a tool, for example, to scale up and get to that?
Yeah.
And your first point was actually, we should have come into play far, far earlier. So maybe that's the first learning, is rather than us working out what we need and what we want to solve, and then go, right, let's bring procurement. You actually want to get right at the start.
Well, I think there's two reasons why. First of all, as I say, it helps to make sure the team is right from a procurement perspective. The other thing is that I've noticed a lot is that the organisation, because they're trying to figure out what they want themselves, will go off and speak to the vendors. Now, as soon as you start speaking to the vendor, they automatically assume they've got some sort of an advantage, or they will potentially, it's that unconscious bias. You've already been speaking to vendor A, and vendor A is giving you a whole sell on how great their product is, and so therefore you're going to be skewed. Potentially, all of your ideas around what you want is going to be skewed to that. The biggest giveaway is a lot of the vendors will say to you, "Can I help you write your RFP for you?" That is them saying, "I want to write it in a way that helps me to ensure I'm going to win this." And as I say, it goes back to that unconscious bias, because you're being informed around a product or a solution before you've even necessarily determined how you can solve the problem.
So we need that level of independence, clearly. But so you're saying effectively don't talk to the vendor first, I
would do it with procurement, because one of the strategies that procurement will involve is, for example, a request for information, where you say, okay, I'm trying to fill out the market. What I want to do is I want to go and put out a questionnaire to a bunch of suppliers. Because I want to get information back in terms of what's their capability, what do they do, what innovation they can do. And I think if you run it as part of a process, it also avoids you burning that supplier. And it goes down to the value, right? If you're spending 10 grand, 20 grand, no one's going to invest in a whole procurement process from a supplier point of view. There's a cost for them to bid. If you're spending millions of pounds, then you just going and having a chat with them, keep having a chat with them, they could get fed up there, so it's going nowhere. Whereas if you do it as part of a process that says, I want to request for information, I want to do some soft market testing, you can get people in. You can actually probably get a couple of vendors in together and actually see them play off against each other to actually figure out, well, what is market leading.
And does that mean that maybe procurement might even agree before anything starts, or maybe at a firm level, and go, we have general rules of engagement. If you're spending less than £20,000 a year, frankly, get a credit card out and buy. If you're spending more than £200,000, just don't touch it until we're involved.
Yeah, generally there is that spend. It's normally down to spending risk. Is the spend over a certain threshold? And is there a risk? Because sometimes you can spend very little, but there's a significant risk because, for example, that product is handling personal information, or it's on a public website, and therefore you've got to have more control, not necessarily around the product, but around how you contract with the vendor for that product, and make sure that you've got the safeguards and the insurance and all of the liabilities in place that are suitable for the repercussions of what if it goes wrong.
So I put out an email request a couple of days ago, asked people either what sort of questions they had themselves. I also talked to a couple of vendors and said, no, if you were able to kind of guide people, what would you say? So one of them had said to me and said, she notices that people will buy a solution to solve a point problem, and they'll get it and install it and use it and they're happy. And then a bit later on, they'll have another point problem, and they'll buy another tool and another one. And then they'll end up with what she calls an integration tax. And she said, if only people took a step back and looked at the bigger picture, and then thought, well, could you be her solution? Because that'd be a broader one. But taking that to one side, there is a challenge, isn't there? Is do we just buy the relatively low cost and it solves my pain point, or do we look for the broader platform?
Then you get trapped into the fact that a lot of these big software vendors, their business is coming in cheap, almost giving it to you free, and then you get stuck in their ecosystem for everything you want. The amount of times that the business said to me, I have this problem, and this is the solution for it. You go in and you buy the core product, and then you find actually to solve all of your problems, you need add-on A, B, C, D, and E. And you're stuck at that point because you've got no competition. They know you have to buy A, B, C, D, and E. From A, B, C, D, and E could be ridiculously expensive. And what do you do at that stage? You rip out the core product, you put it in. The other thing that I've noticed is that you say you've got a lot of product, even in life, right? If everything's in life is, you look at the side of the box and it tells you it's got all of this functionality. It won't necessarily say to you whether that's part of the core product or not. You just say, well, it can do that. Of course, it can do that, but is that what I'm actually getting on day one?
Actually, found it doing this meeting. So Google, I've got Google Suite, I have Google Workspace. It has Meet, we can do the meetings. I then discovered that to be able to record the meeting, as we are, that was another £5 a month for me.
Right, there you go.
Because it said you have Meet, but I just assumed recording part of it.
Right.
No, it's not. Next level up, please, sir.
Right, so then you've got the question is, would the base fee of another product have included that in the base fee? And, you know, what is the quality of the recording? So you do need to get down to what is it that you want? And I would also suggest that I was actually at this event yesterday, and they were looking at your requirements, and they were listing up, say, 10, 20 requirements. Anyone got more requirements? Actually becomes unmanageable. You need to focus on what are the 3 or 4, I'd say no more than 5. What are your key requirements? I would try to get it down to 3 if you can, because it becomes unmanageable. But what are your absolute binaries that you have to have? And the best way to think of it, I think, when you're doing a procurement exercise or you're looking for a product is, how would you evaluate if the product is right for you? So almost, it's like a maze. It's easier to get out of a maze backwards. Is come up with your evaluation criteria, weight your evaluation criteria, and it's only when you can settle as a group, as in forget procurement for now, but as a technology group, as a user group of what are the 5 key things that are important to me in this order, that'll really help focus your mind in what am I actually trying to solve here.
That reminds me of the Amazon piece where they said for a new product or idea, it was write the press release that trumpets what you just launched and how amazing it was. And when you've written that, you can work back to actually what it is.
Right, exactly. And see, a good procurement person should facilitate not answering those questions because they won't have the questions, but facilitate the meetings with the key stakeholders to get to those answers. And then together you will come up with a strategy. As you say, the strategy will either be, you know what, just go off and do it yourself. It will be go off to a gardener and just call them up and see what you want to do. Or it might be, well, we have to go through some market testing. We need to get more information from the vendors. It might even be market warming. It might be that actually vendors aren't interested in selling to you. You have to actually get them interested in selling to you.
So just stepping back, we talked about this idea, whether you do the all-in-one solution or whether you do point purchases. I've worked with CIOs and COs who have both approaches.
Right.
Some have said we're an Informatica shop and we just go down that route.
Right.
That easy. We're an Azure shop is one I think Azure.
Yeah.
And then you'll get other people that know everything's going to be open, whether it's some sort of Linux type sort of open access, or whether it's just it's got to make sure it's got every connectivity so I can plug anything to anything else. The latter one sounds attractive, but I've also had it said that if you go down that route, you lose a lot of functionality because as I can't be specific to one particular product, a lot of the value add I lose because in fact I'm the lowest common denominator when I'll try and plug things together.
I mean, without getting into the technicalities of I think where you're going, if I'm understanding correctly around the IT-specific solutions, that whole debate around open source versus not open source, is I think one of the things to be aware of around open source is the cost of support. Because a lot of the time, the cost of support can be quite high. Their ability to come and respond to a Sev1 issue might not be quite at the level that you want versus a fully commercial product where they are designed, they're able to give you service level agreements around fixes. And so you've also got it goes down to your evaluation criteria. What's more important for you? The reliability, the security of the product. And not that open source isn't secure, but the ability to respond to an incident. Or is it cost, or is it functionality, or is it not getting put into a hostage situation? I think the biggest benefit to me of open source isn't price. It's avoiding that hostage situation. So it is to do with price in the long term, but it's not that initial price point. It's do you think that by getting into bed with a particular vendor that you're going to be stuck with them, and can you live with getting stuck with them? If not, open source, okay, fine, if that's the key criteria.
So is there some sort of rule of thumb about if my project has a budget of £1 million it should be a third on the license and a third on support and a third implementation, or some other ratio? Or could you not generalize
No,
that?
I think actually you have to look at it at the beginning. You have to look and say, what's the problem that I'm trying to solve? If you've got a budget, which most people do have, what is my budget? And then that has to factor into it, because you have to then factor in the cost of support, as you say, the cost of implementation, the cost of the product itself, and then allow yourself potentially some wiggle room for growth. And that's normally the hardest thing, especially if it's a brand new product. When you get into MDM and it's a brand new product, you don't know how much you're going to consume. So if you're going to go down a model that's going to charge you per record or charge you, and you just don't know, you have no idea, then how are you going to price it up?
And I guess it's where the vendor would have experience go, well, based on a firm a bit like yours, they needed 10 million records.
Then you're taking their word for it. You almost want to have an independent like yourself, or like a Gartner that comes in and gives you that. The last thing you want to do is ask the vendor to tell you what you think you're going to spend with them.
So there's that balance, isn't there, that the vendor will have valuable information for you, but equally you're not going to rely on it 100%. You've got to then.
It's their job to make a profit, right? It's their job to make a profit. Why should they necessarily? They're not necessarily going to lie to you, but
I guess they want a long-term relationship, because if they do tell you need 10 million records and you use a fraction, then guess what? When it comes to renew, you're probably off. They'd rather keep you happy and content.
I mean, I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be negative to vendors, but you also got to look at how is the salesperson incentivized. A lot of them are incentivized on the first year fee. So they've got the first year fee. Are they then going to do they really care what happens in the second year? Some of them are incentivized based on the renewals. So a lot of, I think, the advice could come down to the fact that of how they're incentivized.
And I guess that would be a whole separate discussion. But if you're starting up your tech company, again, and you want to get it sold, how do you get it sold? You want enthusiastic salespeople, but again, you want to make sure they're selling for the long term.
And again, this is why you go to procurement. Right. So procurement in general, whether they have it or through their network, would generally have worked with a lot of the vendors, and they'll have had those conversations. And part of their job is to understand the way that the vendors are incentivized, and then to build their strategy around that.
Okay, so sort of wrap up what we've covered in the last 15 minutes or so. We're saying we're going to need sort of rules of engagement for the procurement team, so that we don't get you involved too trivially, but where there's substantial spend or substantial risk or substantial impact, get you involved, and that could be pretty early. And also, when we consider what we need, it's not just about what we need, but it's looking back and going, what's the final output and what do we need to get there?
Yes,
exactly. So we can then start actually doing the specifics. And then at that point, we can start going, well, what's out there? What can solve our problem for us?
Yeah, and you do it as part of the process.
So I'll throw another one, just that sprang to mind. Summarize that. Product and wherever, all these tech solutions that come out every day are trying to solve a problem that you never knew you had.
Right.
So, you'll get this thing, hey, how much do you spend on this? Oh, quite a lot, it's a massive problem. Our tool can do this amazing thing and it will cut time out or make it more efficient, blah, blah, blah. But it was never part of your plan.
Right.
Do you take the view of focus? We knew we were going to do this. This is our business, this is our business model or operating model or spend. Or do you go, yeah, maybe we should take a look at these things?
See, but you're getting into the world of change management now and transformation. And my personal philosophy is that if you're running a change program, it needs to be very focused, because change is hard. The biggest difficulty, I think, for change is that mental leap that staff in an organization have to make, because they've always been doing something one way, you're asking them to do something another way. If you're doing change well, you'll have a really good communication plan around that, so people understand where you're trying to get to, they understand the timings. If you start deviating by adding more change as you're going through change, it's a bit like that line in the sand moving the whole time. I think there's that degree of risk. I think it depends on how much that change is knocking you off course. But if you're veering significantly off a course, I think you probably need to, at the very least, pause and understand how that's impacting your whole change program.
Right, but then on the counter of that is, I've got a program, I've got 18 months, I've got a budget. If I put things in now, I can do it. Once I've delivered, CO will be done now.
Right.
So I've lost the opportunity of doing.
But that goes back to the other point, doesn't it? Is that you could make a decision at the beginning of the program that says, I'm 100% clear the solution I'm trying to answer, and I'm 100% clear with what I think is out there to solve that solution. Or you take what the public sector used to call the competitive dialogue process. It says, I know that I've got a problem, I'm pretty clear with my problem, but I don't necessarily know how I can solve this problem. So what I actually want to do is I want to engage with the market to help me solve that problem. So again, you'd go through that process, but you'd have competitive tension there. So you would say, you wouldn't necessarily go out straight away and say, this is what I want, vendors. You'd say, this is what I'm thinking. Can you come in? Can we workshop? I did a major piece of work 5 years ago, big contract supporting a government workflow. And we didn't have the answer. And actually the process took about, I'd say 6 weeks, where we had multiple bidders coming in for a couple of hours every week, answering a set of questions. So every week they would come in, they would answer a set of questions, same questions, and we'd get thoughts from them. After halfway through, we said we're going to take it down from 6 to 3. And then down from 3 to 2. We don't want to waste everyone's time, because as we're interacting with them, getting ideas of what they could do, it's enabling us to see how they were doing.
It's like the trusted partner piece now, isn't it?
Yeah, but we hadn't contracted with any of them at that point. But because they understood the process, because they volunteered to go through the process, and it was only as we got closer to the end of it, as our minds became clearer on, okay, this is what's available to solve the problems. This is actually the business benefit. And what we did was, as part of the process, we said at the end of 6 weeks, the process stops. We build the business case off the back of that. We put the business case to the executive to get sign off, because at that point we have a pretty good idea of roughly what it will cost. We have an idea of the benefits, because we can understand what product is, and then we'll run the full tender. But we made a commitment to the bidders that said, whoever's still in the process, we're not going to go out and start getting everyone back again, right? Yeah. Is you 2 or 3 that are left, you're going to go on the process, but be aware, hands on heart, transparency. If the business case fails at the executive level, we might not be able to carry on. But if the business case passes, and it's to your advantage, vendor, to help us make the business case pass, then of course we'll carry on with the process. So that is where you don't know exactly what you want, and you need the input from the supply base.
It's a bit like, I suppose, you tell the car mechanic, my car's got to squeak, and then can you help me fix it? Rather than going on and saying, my brake is damaged, can you please replace that part? You let them kind of work with you to find out what you need.
It's innovation, right? It's also where you need innovation. We're saying that there are new products that are coming to market, especially if you've got startups or scale-ups, and you're saying to them, well, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. How would you do it? Because you know that in that environment, you're going to get lots of different answers, as opposed to if it's a commodity product where really the answer is going to be the answer, right? If your brake's gone, your brake's gone. You can ask 3 different people to give you a price, and it really is a race to the bottom on price, as opposed to innovation or skill or capability.
Okay, so moving on to sort of the second part then. So said you've got an in-house procurement team. How can we work with them? So instantly you picked up and said, we've got to engage you, assuming it's worth a big enough piece of work.
Yeah.
Pick up with you early. And if I think about when I've interacted, so often they've had their own questionnaires.
Yeah.
Maybe they've had some sort of quite demanding requirements around security or InfoSec or compliance, or they've asked things like turnover of the business, establish all the funding behind it.
Yeah.
How can we make that process as quick and efficient and smooth as possible?
I think a lot of it goes down to human relationships, really. I think that if you approach procurement early in a process, so the thing that procurement like the best, and I'm not saying that I've ever really seen this happen very often, is when the business goes to the procurement during the budget cycle once a year and says, this is what I'm thinking of doing this year. Because what does that do? First of all, it allows the chief procurement officer to staff their team effectively, to say, right, I can see all of this activity going on in the business, and I can have the right people in the right place available to you. And then I think it's having a relationship with one or more people in the organization, because if you come in, especially if you're a contractor and you're coming in, and you don't necessarily want to break the business rules. Forget procurement rules. Procurement rules are a subset of the overall governance of that business. Is knowing that where to go to find, what are the basic requirements around security, what are the basic requirements around vetting, what are all those type of things. Is either the policy will say, well, you as the business, they're on the website, get them, or you need to go to procurement. So having a relationship with someone at procurement or following the procurement process and saying, I'm going to be doing this. This is roughly what it is. What of it do you want me to do? And then the easy thing for the procurement person is to say, well, actually, you could do all of this yourself. Here are the standard templates. Make sure that these, in order to be able to actually pay this supplier, they're going to have to go through vetting. These are the standard questions. And you can see yourself from the questions. For example, if the question is are you, if it's particularly security rated, are you an onshore provider? Well, straight away, don't waste your time speaking to people that don't have an onshore presence, because they're going to fail the company policy against vetting straight away.
Right.
So I think it's either you knowing where those things are, but you don't necessarily know when all of those processes can get updated. So I think having a contact in procurement and having a relationship, personal relationship with that person to be able to say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm working on this week, next week, in a few months' time. What are the key things I need to know about? Can you let me know if the policy's updated? Just keep me in the loop. So you're not doing procurement's job, but you want to be kept up to date with what's going on in their world and how it impacts you.
You're right, because on the program plan, it might be, we know we're going to have to look at master data. We're not even going to start that phase for 6 months, let alone go to market.
Yeah.
But you're right, at least you can flag at some point in 9 to 12 months' time, it's going to come along, and they can, and that will help matters, they can be ready.
Again, it depends on the size of the organisation. If you're a big, let's say you're a FTSE 100, you're going to have lots of governance gates to go through, of which one of them is probably procurement signing a piece of paper to say, yes, you can do it, no, you can't. What I've found is that if you involve procurement at the end, it's not that they're necessarily spiteful people, but then a paper is pushed on and they say, sign this because I'm going to walk into a governance meeting in an hour. You generally get their backup, and they're not going to be very happy about it. They're not necessarily going to sign it within the hour. If you told them well in advance, then they're probably very happy to sign it and help you lobby, probably. And there's a lot of lobbying that goes on in these things, the appropriate people, so that it does fly through those governance procedures.
And I guess it's bringing back to the data world. Successful business I've worked with an architecture board. So you go, I think we should do solution A.
Yeah.
And then the enterprise architect might go, well, hang on a sec, we have a whole design over here, and you have a problem. How are you going to deal with this issue? An InfoSec can raise a hand, compliance can raise a hand.
Yeah.
And again, it's getting all the stakeholders that would have a care, GDPR will be another one, and can say, well, actually, have you thought about our bits? And effectively what you need is a blessing of each other's teams. Yeah, we're all happy, or you've changed it in such a way that we are now happy. Off you go.
Yeah, an organisation say will either be, let's say, IT-led, with procurement being a stakeholder, or be procurement-led with IT being a stakeholder.
So really, it's coming down to, as you said, like change management. It's just about early engagement, keeping people in the loop.
Yeah, and making sure that you're not missing out on what you actually want to achieve, because that's where it goes wrong, I think, the most, in terms of someone's got an idea of what they want, and normally that means they've got an idea, I want product A from vendor Y, because they've already come to an answer in their head, and they haven't necessarily fully understood the impact of that. Does it integrate with my other systems? Does it do what the business wants to do in 3 years' time? I mean, the biggest issue that I've found, the biggest challenge with businesses is that there's always a hierarchy. You on the ground don't necessarily know what the executive are planning. Are they going to make an acquisition next year? Are they going to have a divestment the next year? And how's that going to impact this product? Right? If you're going to spend millions of pounds putting in a solution, and next year they're going to buy a company that triples the size of the business, is that solution right for the business? So there might even be a value of a touch point, especially if it's significant stuff, right? Significant spending, of just running through that with someone at C-level that says, this is what I'm planning to do. Does that work to the extent that you can share with me? You'll probably have NDAs in place of where we're going as a business, because you want to take, especially with IT investment, I would say at least a 5-year look.
And when you consider that the average CDO, Chief Data Officer, is in role for 2 to 3 years if they're lucky, it's very, very high turnover. That's less than most contracts we've gone for.
Right, but you see the cost of these things, as you know, Charles, is not the initial outlay. It's that integration and ongoing support. And you've got to look at what we call the total cost of ownership. What is the total cost of ownership over a period of time? And I always go back to IT. I remember we're very, very young running an IT company, and I was at an Intel conference, and they talked about this product has a lifetime warranty. And I put my hand up and said, well, what does that mean, lifetime warranty? And they said, lifetime in our world means 5 years. Because in general, that in the IT world is 5 years is the lifetime. By the end of 5 years, it might as well be a dinosaur.
Right. You mean even if it wasn't broken, you would have replaced it because it's just out of date?
It's out of date, inefficient, out of support. Normally, the biggest issues nowadays that you didn't used to have, because everything is connected, is how long are they patching it for? And either that's going to be a problem for you, or it could be a problem for your customers, because a lot of customer contracts will say, well, I will only work with you as my supplier if all of your systems are patched. Well, if you're in a situation where your product is out of support, what are you going to do? So I think you've got to factor in what do I think my total cost over that 5 years, maybe 3 years, right? Each company is different, but don't look at what's my initial cost, what's my total cost over a period of time that I'm realistically going to want to use this for.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I remember comparing two products, but one was on an ongoing license where you just pay for a maintenance feature, and the other one was a standard annual cloud-based license. And the flip was at 7 years. After 7 years, then the ongoing license would have been much better value.
Right.
But who in that team would still be there in 7 years? So the desire was like, look, I'm helping probably not my success, but one or two.
Yeah, but most companies will have, most companies that I've ever worked for will have, again, a set of rules that will come from the CFO around return on investment, whether that's 12 months, 18 months, or how much capital deployed. There'll be a ratio somewhere that's a giveaway of how long you should be calculating that period, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And that's what you want to work out over that period that finance work to. What is my total cost likely to be?
Okay, so again, there's another team to engage with to say, we need to work with you because the business have a way of looking at this.
Definitely, especially when you go into the millions of pounds. Right? When you go to millions of pounds, finance should definitely be part of the stakeholders group that says, how are you going to book this? How are you going to record this? Do I want an OPEX cost? Do I want a CAPEX cost? And do I want to borrow the money? Do I want to pay over X amount of days? And all of these things will input into how do I know what product I want. It could be the technology that there is only the one product, in which case you've got a different conversation that goes on that says the only way we can solve this problem is to pay X. It's almost irrelevant what my budget is because there is no other way around.
Good. So that's when you got procurement team and helping people. Let's go to the smaller firm, especially in the insurance world, where there might only be 200 people in the whole business.
Yeah.
You haven't got a procurement team. CFO will probably sign off significant spend, but you're there running a project. I've got it to work myself, and I haven't got the expertise available to me. Okay. So how do we help these people?
So I think with those, there are two different issues you're trying to tackle there. One is making sure that you're getting the best value for money from the vendor. And the other one is that you're doing the right thing for the business. So in terms of how do you pick the vendor, how do you go and do your market research? You'd have the conversation with the vendors, you get the market information. If you can, try and use benchmarks like you mentioned, Gartner, Forrester, those type of people, because they'll have done a fair amount of research that is useful for you to build up a list on. Always ask vendors, I find this is amazing, is that you ask vendors, say, who's your competitor? They'll always tell you. Always tell you who their competitor is. And then look at the competitor. Look at what the competitor is doing. Use your network on LinkedIn. See if you can find someone that maybe works in another organization that's doing something similar and say, well, what's your experience with this product or this solution? How did it go? So you should basically get as much free information as you can in terms of market research. Because that's what the procurement person's doing. They're doing it for you, right? So to do your market research, use your network. So LinkedIn is a great one for tracking.
People are free with sharing information as well, aren't they?
Yeah, especially if they're in your network.
Generosity.
Especially if they and let's say you can track. Let's say you're interested in a particular product. You can look at people that used to work for that organisation and where are they now? Because if they're not at that organisation, they're freer to talk to you about that product.
Because you can look at their history.
You can look at their history, exactly. And then the other one is when you are engaging with the vendor, even if you don't have a procurement team, you're a business at the end of the day. Even if you're a startup with one person, you are a business, you will have your policies. You don't have to share your policies. You don't have to tell the vendor about your policies. What you can say to your vendor is that we don't have a procurement team, but we have these gateways. Even if the gateway is you, they don't have to know that you are the gateway. And you make a process. You can make a very simple process that is, I'm going to do some market gathering. I'm going to get some pricing. We're going to go and compete it. We're going to go and compete it with X, Y, Z people. And you've got to create. As a fellow of SIPS, I remember one of the questions they asked me as part of becoming a member of SIPS before a fellowship is, what's the most important thing in a procurement? I'm not sure that I fully agree with the answer, but the answer that they wanted was competitive tension. You've got to create competition. The best way to get the best value for money is if someone thinks that it's not a given that they're going to win that piece of work. So you have to create that illusion of, I'm not just going to give you the work. It's why a lot of organizations use e-procurement tools or auctions, because it gives the impression that you're bidding. I've asked this question many times when you use an e-procurement tool to a vendor and they say, how many people are you bidding against? 10, 20, 30. I've run lots of events where it's just one.
So I can use, even if I'm a one-person business, get an e-procurement tool.
I probably wouldn't, but what I'm saying is it's about, you could do, it goes down to the value, right? If you're a one-person band and you're going into the millions of pounds, and this is significant change, right? It goes down to, is this going to be a change for the business? If it's going to be a change for the business, you want to run a process. Whether you've got a procurement team or not, you want to run a process, define a process, go to SIPs, Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. You can go on their website, you can download, world-class processes for free in terms of how you do this. It's follow a process, maybe use a tool. If you're spending not so much, or it's not actually a step change, it's more around just not saying to the vendor, you're going to win this work. It is, I need to go through an evaluation with multiple people to get the right product for me. Whether or not you're having that conversation with 3-4 people is irrelevant, really. It is that the conversation with the vendor is, I am going to be speaking to more than one person.
And yeah, and picking that up in the point you made out who are your rivals. I guess there'll be several vendors go, well, actually, your scale, that's not our world. This other vendor operates with a smaller data set or fewer resources. And they might even say to you, you're better off talking to X.
Yeah. I mean, I would always speak to more than one person. I think it's a bit disingenuous to say I'm just going to speak to one person. But as you said, speak to the people, ask them who they would recommend, right? Appreciating they might be conflicted. If they can provide the tool, it's going to be hard for them to recommend someone else. They can tell you who their competitors are, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is probably the one that they're most scared of, so the one you should be most interested in speaking
to.
Right? And go from there, as I say, but just make sure you have a process that you are following, even if you're not the procurement team. And that process should still be around, what are the key requirements of my business? Am I interested in making sure that this product is supported? If I'm running a live website, for example, an e-commerce website, can I really, and this is critical to it, can I really be in a situation where the response time is 48 hours?
Well, it'll be offline 48 hours.
Yeah. You've got exactly. So you still got to be very clear with what are my requirements and how am I'd still build the evaluation process in your head. Right? Because it's no different to when you're going in your own home and buying a kettle or buying a fridge. You'll still have an evaluation process you're going through in your head. You might not write it down, but it'll probably be involved, energy consumption, power, fit, aesthetics. So just build that, write it down.
So give me an example. Let's say counterparty risk. I found a solution, looks really good, ticks all my boxes, but it's a company in Scandinavia with 5 people.
Yeah.
And you know what? And I think that could be amazing. They could grow and be really good.
Right.
Or there's the established brand, twice the price, but bigger, office in London, I can go talk to them. So clearly, depending on your sort of risk appetite, on your resources, one or the other might be right. But trying to, again, not just go, I think I'll do that, but actually put some process into deciding, should I go with the little 5-guy company or do I go with
it's going to go down to that risk, isn't it? Is you can have a risk.
So how can I assess that risk?
Oh, I mean, that's your world, isn't it, Charles? But not my world. I mean, I would say, first of all, you create risk as a criteria, and you might create it quite high. You might say it's 80% of my. Well, first of all, you decide, is it a binary requirement? If it's not a binary requirement, it's got a weighting. Then you say, well, how am I going to assess the risk? What is the risk impact to me? And then you've got the other thing is that when you've decided what risky means, is then you have to decide how you're going to check the whether or not the risk applies to this one. So in your example in the organisation in Scandinavia, is the risk the fact that it's 5 people? Because it might be that the product is developed, it might be that the product is running on the Amazon cloud, it might be that, for example, you can agree with them an escrow agreement where the actual code has gone into a third party. So even if they all catch a bug, coronavirus, whatever it happens to be, and they all can't work for 24 hours, is that really going to bring the system offline?
No, but I've seen examples on LinkedIn. I'll go, I set up this business, it was brilliant, we loved our suppliers, we loved our customers, it was awesome. But unfortunately, we just couldn't generate enough profit to make it work, and we're going to have to wind it up. So that would be a concern. I suppose the other way around, it did really, really well. And then one of the big boys, IBM, went and bought it, and suddenly it bought the IBM package.
To me, it goes down to what is the cost of change? What is going to happen if it fails in terms of what's the impact going to be in terms of my business's reputation? As my business reputation going to be impacted by that company failing? And what's the potential cost?
No, it's about web hosting. They fail. You're in a very sticky situation.
Right, exactly. And then you've got the other one that says, all right, they failed. My reputation isn't damaged, but the cost to now move to another supplier is going to be millions of pounds. Was it really beneficial doing that? So I think not that. I think it's impossible to answer that question without being in the situation and doing that evaluation.
Well, I guess you did answer in a way, because you said the evaluation is still what's the impact. So if it's going to be, well, actually, if that system stopped working, because often when firms go under, they don't take the last minute. They've been fighting valiantly to keep it and eventually throwing it out. But if it's, I can extract all my data, stick in some other tool quite quickly, maybe manually for a bit until I find a new solution. Good. But you're right, if it's my web hosting, if it's my entire back office of my online sales, and that's gone, then that's a much bigger risk, and I'm going to have to wait.
Anyone can fail, right? Anyone can fail. The big players can also fail. You know what's going to happen. Less likely. I mean, the biggest contracts that I've worked on, which are more government related, will have things like escrow for the code. They'll have step-in rights, whereby if the company fails, you have the ability to go to the liquidator and actually continue to run the product.
So these would be clauses in the contract.
These would be clauses in the contract.
So are these sort of things be in the SIPS templates that you mentioned?
Potentially, I haven't looked at the SIPS templates for a while, but or there will be, if you look at for procurement terms and conditions, or well, terms and conditions depends on services, but there'll be lots of things out there that you could possibly use. I'm not going to plug particular companies, but there are lots of benchmarking firms out there, should we say, that you can subscribe to their toolkits, and their toolkits have the most fantastic templates that are probably really worth the £10,000 or £20,000 or wherever much it might be to have access to their libraries that are possibly more valuable than some of the free stuff, but considerably cheaper than having necessarily a big team. You're never going to get as good as risk-free an answer as using professionals, whether they're law firms or procurement. But if you're in a situation, you're saying to me, your situation is you have no choice. You're a small company. You can't afford the lawyers. You can't afford the consultants. You want a bit more than free, then I think subscribing to some of these organisations that have worked templates with examples could be very valuable. In the same way, you can buy the wills online and all those type of things. You can do the same for procurement.
So there's actually quite a lot of tools to the person that has their in-house team.
Yeah.
And I guess the other option is always to bring in someone as a consultant or contractor.
But they might not have it. I mean, even me, that's been chief procurement officer, I always advocate signing. I don't want to mention the names because it sounds like to plug certain products, but there are certain organisations that I would always subscribe to have access to their market research, to their templates, because no matter how many people you've got in your legal team, you might not have the template for that particular product, whereas those specialists probably do have the template for that particular product.
But also the point is, even if you haven't got a procurement professional, there are resources out there that you can actually do a credible job, as long as you think of it like a professional would. That you've got to have a process, got to consider different factors, and whether it's for free or whether it's paid.
Yeah, exactly.
Go and find what you need to fill in the gaps in the knowledge.
Yeah.
Just having a look again, some of the other comments that people shared with me. One of the vendors suggested me and said, look, you want to look at people in your industry, whether it's same type of project, same type of vertical. Said look at things like what's after sales support, which you did, about exec sponsorship, and sort of about having a customer advisory group, because his point was a vendor that does that and actually lets you influence the roadmap, you're more likely to sort of steer things the way you want it to.
I mean, that is interesting. I think it's also going to go down to how much you're spending with that customer, so they're going to have you influence it. But I went to a talk actually a few weeks ago with a founder of a software company, and he made a really good comment, in my opinion, and I wrote it down. I think I posted it on LinkedIn, which was a really good software company, and I agree with him, shouldn't necessarily be saying to the customer what functionality do you want, and go to one customer and make that functionality, because that's bespoke for that customer. What they should be doing is listening to an industry group and saying what problems is the industry trying to solve, and then designing their product around solving an industry-wide problem as opposed to an individual user's particular wish list. So I think that those customer forums are great if they're using them, and you accept, it's about expectations, right? If you accept that as the customer, you making a demand on a huge multinational organization is not necessarily going to happen, but recognizing that if you can get a lot of people in the industry saying, well, this is a problem, then that is useful. And it's good, the fact that they're willing to have that conversation, the fact that they're willing to listen makes them more attractive, I would say. Yes, and you could put that as part of the evaluation criteria.
Yeah, I mean, something thing about Lloyd's of London, the insurance world, there's a thing called Blueprint 2, the whole way they look at data is changing. There are certain vendors who have engaged in that space and are busy modifying their tool to meet the need. That the carriers, the insurers, and the reinsurers probably haven't realised they had that problem yet, but they're already busy developing.
Right.
Whereas another vendor that's just not in that world, not engaged,
Yeah.
maybe the focus is on pharma or financial services, takes itself out of your scope because they're not engaged in the way that.
But then you get your catch-22, don't you? That a lot of the people that are faster to react to these problems are the startups. So then you get your catch-22, right? You've got the startup that's identified the problem faster and found the solution faster, but then you're dealing with the risk of, do I want to go with the startup? So how do you solve that problem?
It goes back to your, effectively your weighting of what matters to you and what's the impact.
Exactly. Or maybe you run systems in parallel.
So when you mentioned in parallel, I've heard of that on one occasion. Because I asked who they chose, and so we chose A and B. Well, I'm going to say I chose two. And they talked about a champion and supporter. I can't remember.
Okay.
Champion and something else. But the point was, they said, is you've got the established brand, established product, and we'll put 85% of the data through that.
Right.
And then we'll use the other niche product for 10-15%. And if we see that it does much better on the smaller proportion, we'll consider using it a bit more. And if it doesn't really have any value, we'll go back to the main kind of established product, which is, I've never really seen that sort of idea before.
I mean, I can't quite see how that would work brilliantly with master data management, because the whole concept of master data management is you've got a single master. So
maybe for a small domain,
you're the expert. Yeah,
you've got a product for the domain, money sale. So I don't know, some reference data. I'll use other different tools to see.
Well, definitely in the hardware world, the infrastructure world, that works. I mean, the classic example in the press a few years ago around Apple and the chips, and do they want to put all of their eggs in one basket for one fabricator, or do they want multiple? So I think when it comes to more tangible products, having a primary and a secondary, my understanding, I'm not an expert in this, you are, is that the regulations around insurance and banking is that the supply chain can't have a single point of failure. You always have to have at least two suppliers. So that goes back to that answer, is it almost makes it easier to have the startups in the financial services industry, because there's a demand to have your primary and your secondary. I think when it comes to master data management, I'm definitely not the expert, and you definitely are the expert, so I would defer to you on whether you can have two vendors on that in that process.
And maybe it could be, again, I think it will be a pretty extravagant, sorry, the wrong word, but certainly you need to have a very large amount of resources to start doing two implementations. But maybe you're right if you want to try on a smaller, maybe a subset of your products. So maybe customer days goes through your known answer and you try a little set of their different domain.
It's not what the problem you're trying to solve, right? Is it a problem that's going across all of your data, or is it a particular, as you say, customer subset where you can use that tool for that? Because when it comes to risk, the safest one is where you can always go to a manual solution if the technology fails.
Just having a look at the chat. It looks like you'll have the ability to run message. If anyone in the group wants to sort of come up with any comments, I can unmute you and let you in, or we can do chat. I think we have just over 5 minutes left. Okay. Well, maybe I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that. Let's sort of try and wrap this all up. So what do we say? So what do we come with the challenge? We came from the challenge of saying, I want to buy something. Where do I start? And I think you captured that and said, assuming it's over a particular scale of risk or impact, engagement up really early, even if it's saying we might want the solution in 9 months' time, but be aware that I'm going to come back to you on the air and I'd see they might be able to share things in advance with the templates or requirements. If they say you are not going to do any work with a South American company, at least you know that nice and early, because it's a blanket rule. We then talked about working the procurement team in more detail and said how again, it's like so much of change, isn't it? Relationships and building that connection, because you don't want to be throwing them saying, please sign this off now, because frankly they won't. And that's not just procurement, that will be with IT, legal, compliance, risk, finance, our world. And then fascinatingly was where you haven't got your in-house procurement, you're saying there are the resources out there that you can effectively do it yourself, as long as you think that way with a proper process. And you can find insights, you can find checklists and things things to consider, such as the example which I certainly haven't thought of, which has now absolutely escaped me. It's a good time to think about it. about code, like to put code necessarily so that even if the vendor disappears,
Yeah.
you can still run the tool because it's legally,
Yeah.
you've made sure you protect that in advance.
Yeah, no, exactly. Procurement is a profession, and therefore there's a lot of things that are published out there. I would say that you have to balance it. It works better when you don't have a procurement team. When you're a smaller organisation, probably more of a startup, because you have that nimbleness and probably the closer connections to the ownership to be able to make those decisions. When you're a larger organisation with a lot of governance, far more acute awareness of risk, then having a procurement team and allowing them to actually manage that risk and allowing it's horses for courses, isn't it? Let the people with the IT expertise define the product, do the integration, let the procurement team manage the risk, manage ensuring that you're getting value for money.
And I think that's probably a really good way to wrap things up. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
For joining me. I mean, we didn't even talk about your previous experience. Logical, but you were at the Olympics, you were buying.
A lot of technology for the Olympics. Yeah, I developed the organisation structure and strategy for the Olympic Games. That was a great time. We spent about £500 million on technology there, and that was all about risk, because that was all about live broadcast event, 1.5 billion people watching live. No amount of penalties are really going to cut it. If it failed, you have to say to Usain Bolt, please rerun the 100 meters. So that was really all about risk and making sure you got value for money for the people that were putting the money into the games.
Fascinating stuff. Daniel, thank you. Everyone else, bye-bye.